Tonight on The Buzz, we celebrate Thanksgiving with some of our favorite episodes from past months. We start with storytelling. At the heart of every media project is a story, but what is a story? Norman Hollyn, editor and professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, talks with us about his process of crafting a story. Next, Mark Harrison, managing director of DPP, explains a new survey DPP recently finished studying how production companies are handling technological change. The results may surprise you. Next, Barbara Griffith realized 27 years ago that it was really difficult for filmmakers to finance the gear they need for their projects. So she set out to change that. She founded SCL Equipment Finance. Today, everyone from independent filmmakers to Disney is using her company to buy the gear they need easily and affordably. Next, Jim Malcolm is the North American General Manager for Humaneyes. They make the Views VR camera. Recently, the Views was lifted to the International Space Station to create a segment for National Geographic. Jim explains what it took to make that happen. Then he and I chat about the current state of VR, where it's growing, and what needs to happen to bring it to the mass market. All this, plus James DeRuvo with the weekly doddleNEWS update. The Buzz starts now.
Since the dawn of digital filmmaking,
authoritative,
one show serves a worldwide network of media professionals,
current,
uniting industry experts,
production,
filmmakers,
post-production,
and content creators around the planet.
Distribution.
From the media capital of the world in Los Angeles, California, the Digital Production Buzz goes live now.
Welcome to the Digital Production Buzz, the world's longest-running podcast for the creative content industry, covering media production, post-production, and marketing around the world. Hi, my name is Larry Jordan. It's Thanksgiving night here in the U.S., a time to celebrate friends, family, and our many blessings. As our way of saying thanks, we're presenting some of our favorite interviews from the last several months. We selected these based upon two factors: how much fun they are to listen to and how much good information they have to share. By the way, if you enjoy The Buzz, please give us a positive rating and review in the iTunes store. We appreciate your support to help us grow our audience. And now it's time for our doddleNEWS update with James DeRuvo. Hello, James, and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too, Larry.
You know, I can't wait to get back to Thanksgiving dinner, so let's get right to the news. What's happening?
We have a little bit of some bad news. Apple has put out a tech note stating that they're going to basically be eliminating legacy media codec support in future versions of Mac OS. The general feeling here is that they're going to be eliminating 32-bit legacy media codecs, including support for DNX HD and GoPro Cineform. But DNX HR is also mentioned, which is a little odd because it's a 64-bit codec. Other 32-bit codecs will probably also be eliminated, but it's unclear which ones at this point. And Apple recommends completing any of your outstanding projects in those codecs and then exporting them all to 422 ProRes.
Well, James, this is actually a really, really big deal, and this is just the tip of the story. But so far, what are your thoughts?
Well, the current thinking is that Apple is preparing Mac OS even further as they move away from Intel to their ARM-based chips in 2020 that they've been designing, something which these codecs will not be capable of supporting. But there's also a theory out there that Mac OS and iOS 12 will continue their gradual convergence. And as we make our way towards a post-PC world, if that's the case, we may be seeing the last Mac OS-based desktop computers coming in the next few years.
There's a lot more to this story because it's not just current projects, but all the legacy media that's stored in DNX HD and GoPro Cineform. And I'm already doing some research to follow up on this, and we'll feed that back to Doddle. So we'll be coming back to this story more than once. What's our number 2 story?
A cool new product out called Luna Display, which can turn your iPad into a second monitor for your iMac, your MacBook Pro, or even your Mac Mini. It uses a USB-C or mini DisplayPort plug that connects your iPad to your Mac via Wi-Fi. And both your iPad and your Mac will be operating the Luna Display apps to communicate. Depending upon your Wi-Fi connection, you could get near zero latency by doing this.
That's interesting. What more do you know about this?
Well, there have been several software solutions that have done the same thing, essentially hacking your Mac into thinking that your iPad is a USB-based display, but they're software hacked. And as a result, that type of application leaves out advanced performance features like GPU acceleration and support for Apple's Metal architecture. But Luna Display's hardware-based solution essentially converts your iPad into a USB display, with the maps doing all the translation back and forth between Mac OS and iOS 12. The result is full access to your Mac OS, plus you'll be able to get back into iOS with a simple swipe up. It's a pretty cool little feature, and we're going to be reviewing it in the future weeks.
Okay, we've covered Apple and Luna Display. What's story number 3?
You may recall that SmugMug bought Flickr, the free photo backup service. Well, they've updated the Flickr terms of service, and they're going to be limiting user accounts. Beginning in 2019, users will be limited to 1,000 still image and video files online, with the rest being deleted, starting with the oldest files first. What they're hoping to do is they're hoping to encourage users to upgrade to the pro-level Flickr service, which will be doubled to $49.95 a year as opposed to $24.95 a year, but you will get unlimited storage at that point. Users are going to be offered a 30% discount to upgrade to the pro level, but you have to do so by November 30th.
I hate the term deleting images. So what's the inside scoop?
Yahoo started giving users a full terabyte of free image storage. Flickr went from a community of photographers sharing their best images and getting feedback to a place where users would just back up everything that they had with no triage. They would just dump. I mean, I've got 15,000 images on Flickr right now. The result was an unsustainable business model where they hoped that users would upgrade to the Pro service, but 97% never did. By limiting access to 1,000 stills for free and enticing users with 30% off for the Pro level, SmugMug hopes to bring Flickr back to its original community where photographers got together and supported one another online. Users will have until January 8th, 2019 to back up their images and get their list down to 1,000. And that includes video too, because you can back up videos as well. And we have details on how to do that at doddleNEWS.com.
James, what are the stories you're following this week?
Other stories we're following? We have a great list of Black Friday deals, and the best part is they're all going on right now. You don't have to wait until Friday. The new iPad Pro is incredibly easy to break in two, and it looks like the DJI Phantom 4 has better resolution than the new Hasselblad-enabled Mavic 2 Pro drone. That's what's going on here. What's going on tonight on The Buzz?
Well, tonight, in celebration of Thanksgiving, we're running some of our favorite segments from the past several months, looking at storytelling, how technology changes are affecting production, and how to finance your gear, as well as insights on shooting VR.
Well, as I sit there in my tryptophan-induced coma, I hope to enjoy every single one of them.
I hope you do as well. James, where can we go on the web to read these and all the other stories that you're covering?
All these stories and more can be found at doddleNEWS.com.
And James DeRuvo is the editor-in-chief of DoddleNEWS and joins us every week. I'll see you next Thursday.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And a happy Thanksgiving to you. Here's another website I want to introduce you to, doddleNEWS.com. DoddleNEWS gives you a portal into the broadcast, video, and film industries. It's a leading online resource presenting news, reviews, and products for the film and video industry. DoddleNEWS also offers a resource guide and crew management platform specifically designed for production. These digital call sheets, along with their app, directory, and premium listings, provide in-depth organizational tools for busy production professionals. DoddleNEWS is a part of the Thalo Arts community, a worldwide community of artists, filmmakers, and storytellers. From photography to filmmaking, performing arts to fine arts, and everything in between, Thalo is filled with resources you need to succeed. Whether you want the latest industry news, need to network with other creative professionals, or require state-of-the-art online tools to manage your next project, there's only one place to go: doddleNEWS.com. Norman Hollyn is an editor, a writer, and full professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, where he is also the inaugural recipient of the Michael Kahn Endowed Chair in Editing. Norman and I also co-host the popular website, Two Real Guys. Hello, Norman. Welcome.
Hey, Larry. Been a while. How are you?
Well, I have to grin every time I talk about you being a chair. I think that is just the most hysterical thing, because I can't imagine you sitting down, actually. You have been everywhere.
I'm an editor. I sit even when I'm on planes.
Norman, tonight we want to focus on storytelling, which I know is one of your favorite things to talk about. So to get us started, how do you define a story?
Okay. So for me, a story is inextricably tied together with an audience. So you have some things that you want the audience to understand about any subject that you happen to be talking about. So it's a series of shots or sounds or music or whatever you want to do that you want to have an effect on that audience.
So you can't have a story without an audience? Is that what you're saying?
I believe that's true. Sometimes the audience is only yourself, so you can have an audience of one. Most of us like to have an audience of slightly more than one, maybe much, much more than one. We're not individually writers, just creating work for ourselves. Most of the people I know are trying to create work for as many people as they can convince to listen or watch or experience it.
So your philosophy is like a tree falling in the forest. If no one hears it, then it isn't a story. But when somebody does hear it or view it, then it is a story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the it is if there's a empty, unpopulated forest. I don't know what that actually even means. But I do know that the people who I've spoken to, who may be, lawyers or editorial boards of newspapers or filmmakers or whatever, they all are involved in conveying a story, conveying meaning, conveying emotions to a larger group of people, even if that group of people is only two. Conveying stories to an audience.
I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes with Tom Jennings, who's coming on after you. But one of the ideas,
looking forward to that.
It's a great interview. He did a fabulous job. But one of the ideas that I pitched to him is my now current definition of a story, which is that a story is a journey. It's a process that includes emotion and changes. Because what we're seeing movement over time. Would you agree, disagree, or say that I'm barking up the wrong tree?
No, I absolutely agree. You've actually spent too much time with me, Larry. For me, it is about change. It is about contrast. It is something through time. Now, the time may be I'm looking at a photograph and I'm parts of the image, or a painting, or a piece of sculpture. But it's the audience who's exploring that in their time. I think that's 1,000,000% correct.
Can storytelling be taught, or is it a natural gift?
Well, I don't know. I teach storytelling at USC, so I'm hoping we can teach it. I think that if you're absolutely tone deaf to the way in which people receive story and what the needs are to help build audience involvement, then, yeah, I can't teach very much. But at least the people who have some sensitivity and ability to know that there's a difference between what a character may feel in a piece of cinema or a documentary or corporate video, news or whatever, what they might feel at the beginning versus the middle versus after the middle versus the end. If they're aware of that, then, yeah, we can give tools to help them understand how to better tell their stories.
I think it's akin to dance. If you've got natural gifts in terms of being able to move without tripping over the lines on the floor, you can be taught to enhance it, but you have to have sort of like a base level of natural talent. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think that there are some people who are tone deaf to story. And when I say tone deaf, what I'm really talking about is, once again, the audience perceiving the story, how the audience gets involved with your story, and they might be tone deaf to that. But I think there's lots and lots of people, way more people, who are better at storytelling than they actually give themselves credit for. In fact, if I could take a few seconds, the very first time that I taught in Jordan, the very first thing that I did there was I asked them all to come in with a story that maybe their parents had told them, or a story that happened to them the day before, just something. And then we shot them telling that story, and then it evolved from there. But they all had a way of telling stories, maybe different at different cultures, but they all understood story.
Well, that leads me to one of the key things that I want to talk with you about today. You've been traveling all over the world, teaching and lecturing, and I don't even want to have you give me a list because I get too depressed. But given that you've been immersed in all these different cultures, how does storytelling vary by culture?
That's a great question. I think that stories themselves are relatively consistent among different cultures. I don't think you can make a generalization about stories, but you can, I think, make some important distinctions about the storytelling process, how different cultures will tell stories differently. One of the strong awarenesses that I had after giving a week-long workshop in Estonia, and there were lots of Eastern Europeans who were there, is they have a very different sense of editorial pace of what a camera can and cannot be doing than we here in the United States do, for instance, where we try and constantly keep the camera moving, even if it's just a little move all the way through, and cut more frequently, all of that. And that is cultural. But the content of the stories themselves are quite often the same. It's just how they absorb the story, well, how an audience absorbs the story, and therefore how the filmmakers can tell that story. That's where things become different in terms of the storytelling part of it, not the stories themselves.
For people who are surrounded with way too much information and are trying to get their story focused, what's a good process that we should follow to put a story together?
So I always ask myself when I'm editing something or tell students to look at that is, whose story is this? To kind of step back. Now, that may be harder to do in a documentary where the writing is evolving as you're shooting and editing, but still there's a core to it, and I imagine you and Tom will talk about this. But whose story is it? And then how does that person begin? Give me some adjectives for that. How does that person end? Give me some adjectives for that. What changes? What doesn't change? And then where do things change? So then you can shape that story, or how you tell the story, shape that character. So focusing in on the who first, and then the what that changes, and then the where. So keeping kind of laser focused on the people and the audience who will be looking at those people.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that that's both very granular and very broad. You could look at each scene with who is that scene about, as well as the entire film, and say, what is the film about? This can be used for breaking down a scene as well as analyzing the whole overarching story. True?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I don't know how to cut a movie. I don't even know how to cut a scene, but I know how to cut moments and have them build into a scene and have them build into the story. So on the most general level, I have to know what the overall story wants to be, even if it changes, but what that story wants to be in order to figure out what that scene wants to do to advance that story, and then figure out what the best shape for that scene is in order to tell the story of that scene, which will add up to the story of the whole movie, TV show, corporate video, whatever it is.
Norman, I knew as soon as we started talking about story that you would have opinions. And for people that want to keep track of your thoughts about stories and filmmaking in general, where can they go on the web?
I would follow me on Twitter, because who's not on Twitter, right? And my handle on that is @Schnittman.
That's SCHNITTMAN. And Norman Hollyn is a full professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. And as always, Norman, thanks for joining us. This has been fun.
It has been fun. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Mark Harrison has 20 years' experience as an award-winning freelance producer and director. He's now the managing director and co-founder of the Digital Production Partnership, or DPP. This is an international business change network for media companies. Hello, Mark. Welcome back.
Hi there, Larry. Great to speak to you again.
Mark, the reason we want to talk with you today is about your recent survey on production. But before we get to that, give us a quick description of who DPP is so we can get a better understanding of your perspective.
We're a media industry organization that uniquely works with the whole supply chain. So we're not a trade body that represents a particular group. We're actually an independent organization that will work with anyone from production through the supplier network to the content providers and the platforms to help them to understand and manage change and try and improve their businesses to cope with it.
Well, that leads directly into the survey that you recently conducted. It was a survey on how production really works. What was the purpose of the survey?
As somebody who comes from production, I've always been aware that although the content that gets made by producers is the oil, if you like, that sort of lubricates the wheels of our industry and makes us function, that nonetheless, the world of production is rather mysterious and kind of dark and strange to those that aren't in it. And generally speaking, particularly amongst technology suppliers and service providers, there's a really poor understanding of the culture of production, what production does and how it works. So we thought that given that, everybody's saying how video is driving the internet and how there's more production now than ever before, that we'd just reach out to the production company community and find out actually who's out there, what are they doing, and how are they doing it.
I tell you, having done production for 40 years, it's amazing that anything actually gets recorded on film or a camera. So, and I've been on the inside much more than the outside. So who did you interview?
Well, we had responses from almost 60 different production companies. They were mostly in the UK, although not exclusively. There were some from the States and some from continent of Europe. But they ranged in type from great big independent production groups, global production entities, right the way down to, tiny companies, a couple of people. And they ranged in content creation from people making multi-million-pound drama through to people making very low-cost branded content. And whilst all of them the same 50 questions, and there were 50 questions that mostly had drop-down type answers so that we could create data that we could then analyze and find some patterns in.
Well, here's the question I've wanted to ask ever since I read about this survey. What did you learn?
I guess the key thing we learned was this, that the production community seems now to be divided into two primary groups. On the one hand, you have production companies that still overwhelmingly direct their activity at the broadcast market. So they're mostly making for television. And they're beginning to make for the major online providers as well. But that's, of course, still essentially the same kind of content. Pretty high quality, major projects take a long time to make. So you have those. And those companies either are quite sizable, like 100 or so employees or more, and turning over, $5 to $10 million a year or more. Or even if they're smaller, they tend to exist within a group of companies. So they still have a bigger entity that owns them. So you have that group. And then at the other end, what we found was a huge number of very small independent production who couldn't care less about TV. These companies are directing their effort branded content and promotional content. Found a new area of business in which they can thrive.
In your press release, now that we've got these two groups, those that are working with broadcast and those that are working for the web, you talk about the culture of production. How has this changed over the last few years?
Well, what we found was that in many respects, the culture amongst broadcast production companies has changed remarkably little. They're still in that cycle of big, long projects. They increase and decrease in size quite dramatically depending on how the work comes in and the work goes. Yes, they have slightly more multi-skilling. Yes, they do now do a lot of offline post-production in-house. Yes, they quite often own some production equipment themselves, like cameras and sound recording equipment, because some of their people are doing self-shooting. But they're not dramatically different from what one would have found 10 years ago. Largely, these are people in particular roles with very particular jobs in the production chain. And that's because big productions actually demand that kind of specialism. But then in these smaller entities who are directed at non-broadcast activity, you have pretty much the reverse of that. They're very flat, they're non-hierarchical. They tend not to have separate offices for their bosses. They are highly multi-skilled. They do a lot of stuff themselves. So what we found was that the type and range of content that those companies make is actually far greater than the bigger entities, because they'll make whatever they need to make in order to satisfy their client. And they're very at home with the cloud and with connected services in a way that broadcast group just aren't.
I want to come back to the cloud, but before I forget, do your findings apply mostly to the UK, or can we extend these to North America and the rest of Europe?
I think we have to say that we're confident about this in the UK because we had fewer respondents from the other territories. We'd have to say there's nothing that we found that was inconsistent with this, but I couldn't be quite so confident that it's exactly true. I'm pretty confident, however, that as a general observation, that production around branded content is now a really major endeavor worldwide.
You mentioned just a minute ago that there's a difference in how production companies are using the cloud. What have you found?
Well, what we found actually was that overall, still across the board, with all kinds of companies, remarkably few are using cloud storage. So only 40% of all the companies who responded to our survey are using cloud storage. They're still living in a world of hard drives on shelves. But what we also found was that when it comes to having confidence in using cloud-based services, that actually 80% of our companies who were very confident to use those kinds of services are in the non-broadcast community. When you look at the world of sort of traditional broadcast making content, they're still remarkably immune to a lot of the developments that have happened around connectivity.
It sounds like, and I guess we should really expect this, that smaller companies are faster to embrace new technologies than larger companies. From this, what can we extrapolate?
I think that's true. The smaller companies are much faster at adopting new technology than the big ones. What I think we can see in this is that actually there is a risk for larger companies that they're going to get left behind. They're going to find themselves sitting on islands of production techniques that actually restrict them to the world of premium content. Now, make no mistake, in the world of premium content, very traditional production techniques are still highly relevant. Now finding you've got producers who actually want to work with new technology, who want to be agile, who want to use different and new means of production. And if they look for where they're going to want to work, right now, they're going to be more tempted to go and work in a small company making promotional and branded content than they are working in television.
What's DPP going to do with the findings of this report?
Well, we're sharing them with our membership, and as you can imagine, it's causing quite a lot of interest. And the next stage for us, I think, will be to go on and actually look further into this this branded content production group, because there's a really interesting sort of bigger industry question emerging here, which is, are these companies that have grown up making branded content going to begin to invade the territory of the traditional operators? Or are we going to see the two worlds remaining remarkably separate? Because if we do see them start to invade some of that traditional territory, then I think for perhaps the first time we could begin to see some fundamental changes in the way that production actually works.
That is a fascinating report. I guess it's not surprising, but it's nice that it's quantifiable.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it, Larry. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these things we sort of expected, but to be able to actually express it in numbers is very satisfying. And no one's done that before, as far as I'm aware.
Mark, for people that want more information about DPP or want to become a member, where can they go on the web?
They can go to our website, digitalproductionpartnership.co.uk, digitalproductionpartnership.co.uk.
That's all one word with no spaces, digitalproductionpartnership.co, not .com, .co.uk. And Mark Harrison is the managing director of DPP. And Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Larry.
Barbara Griffith is the president of SCL Equipment Finance. They provide financing to the media industry. And, you know, when you think about it, businesses need capital so they can grow or purchase new equipment. And SCL has been a leader in providing the capital for over 25 years. Hello, Barbara. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much.
Tell me about what SCL Equipment Finance is. Tell me about the company.
SCL Equipment Finance is an equipment finance company, and we provide funding nationwide, including Canada, to the media industry. So, for example, if a production company needs a new editing system or a cameraman needs a new camera, whatever gear they need, we will supply the funding for that gear.
When should a company come to you? Is there like a minimum finance amount, $500,000 or $7 billion or something?
That's a good question. You should come to us when you're looking to purchase equipment and want to keep capital inside of your business. So, for example, our finance programs range anywhere from $10,000 to $10 million. And if you're a cameraman who needs to replace an older camera and purchase a new, let's say, Sony camera, and that camera is $50,000, you're not necessarily going to write a check for $50,000. That is a huge burden for any company. They need to reserve their capital so that they can use that capital for other expenses, like your paycheck, accounts receivable. So in equipment financing, which, by the way, has been around well over 50 years, it's the number one way that businesses acquire capital. We happen to specialize in the media industry, So back to the reason why maybe a production company needs to replace an older storage. Storage is big now, so they can finance that storage. And they would want to keep that capital inside their place of business and pay for that piece of equipment on a stream of payments as you would a mortgage payment. Can you even imagine when you air this, you've got some guy who maybe is filming and he knows that he's not going to be able to get that new contract because he doesn't have the funding to go get that new camera?
I know exactly what you mean.
Now he comes to us and we don't need a bunch of financials. We just need that one-page application, and we're going to give him a stream of payments, and he's going to be able to, work and perform just as the big guys do. We're an approved finance company with Disney, so Disney finances their equipment. We did a lot of the financing for J. Paul Getty Museum when they went in there and built that museum off the 405.
In general, and I know every case is different, but what levels of funding are people coming to you for now?
We see a lot of production companies in the media industry because technology consistently changes. So we see between $25,000 and $350,000. That seems to be a really good niche market to replace older equipment.
Why should we use your services and not go directly to a bank?
Oh, that's a good question. We love our banks, the Wells Fargos and the Bank of Americas, but as we well know that they are FDIC insured and federally regulated. They're just not that interested in taking a piece of equipment like maybe some software or a camera and financing that. So our collateral is our equipment. Normally, our clients will come to us, and we call it the app-only program. Maybe many of your viewers or audience may know and remember when you could get a home loan based on stated income. It's a little different for us, but we will ask you a few questions. Number one is, how long have you been in business? And that magic number is if you've been in business at least 2 years or more, you're going to be a very good candidate to get financing. We don't usually look at financial statement because a lot of times our customers are buying, let's just say that you have a contract with CNN and you need a new uplink truck. And they're putting a demand on you to get the latest equipment so that can be, uplinked to their channel. So, you would want to finance that equipment there, and we're going to be able to do it a lot easier than your banking relationship. I walked into this industry 27 years ago when there was no funding available for the broadcast or the media industry, and I created the portfolios for most of these banks to accept our industry, which is our sole proprietorship who films on the weekend, to the Mike Levesque's in New York City who films for major TV productions, right? Nobody really wanted to fund a camera that got actually, you take to China, right? So it's not like a house that's stable or a dry cleaner that you can walk into their store. I hope the industry actually create programs that our broadcast industry can now get.
You made a good point. You said the banks are insured and are federally regulated, and they've got a lot of regulations to follow, which means they're probably going to be around for a while. It sounds like this is much more unregulated and much less safe. Is that true?
Oh, no, not at all. Our partners are all of the banks that we're a very safe environment. Equipment financing has been around for well over 50 years. It's $1 trillion industry. What we consider that the money that we're going to let you borrow is going to be written up almost like a rental agreement. So you can see if you take the same philosophy of when you first rented that apartment and you went into the landlord to fill out a rental agreement, you really didn't own that particular rental, but you rented the apartment much easier than buying the apartment. And so that's kind of our rules and regulations too. You do own the equipment at the end if you choose to do that, but because of the way that the law is written or the way that our lease agreements are written, it's much easier to qualify. All of our major banks are big players in equipment financing. It's an extremely safe environment, but I'm going to do a little disclosure here. All companies have a reputation. So there's good production companies, there's not so good production companies, there's good doctors, there's good printers. And so you want to work with a solid company with whatever you do. You want to follow the reputation of that company.
When should we finance and when should we rent?
Oh, that's a good question. I just gave a workshop this weekend to a group, and it was how to start a business, and that was something we'd like to cover. If you're using a camera once a month and that camera rental is $175 a day, then you know that you're going to rent that for $175 a month. That is going to be your expense. If you are looking at a camera, which is like $50,000, and that camera you're going to be using 5 or 6 times a month or more, and the lease payment, let's say, is $500 a month, then it's going to behoove you to go ahead and buy the equipment through a traditional lease program or equipment financing program so that you can pay the $500 a month, use the equipment as much as you need, and then offset the outside expense like a rental. So you have to determine how often you need that equipment. Rent the equipment first, then you'll make that decision on how much capital is going out of your company for rental expense. It's called replacing outside services.
Where does your capital come from?
That's a good question. Our capital comes from all different types of portfolios. It will come from an FDIC-insured bank like a Wells or like a Key Bank or Susquehanna, places of that nature. We also work with Wall Street, which, of course, if you can even imagine how aggressive Wall Street is. We work with private equity funds. So, for example, private equity funds might be you and I go to the bank, we go get $230 million from a Wells Fargo, let's say, and then we bring that X amount of dollars into our place of business, and we then create the credit scores for our clients to borrow from us.
What terms, especially the interest rate, how is that calculated? And what's the rate currently?
The interest rates are all credit driven. So the better the company, the better the interest rate. Leases and equipment financing usually does not have a true interest rate because, again, it's going to be written like a lease agreement. A lease agreement doesn't really have the same qualifications as a loan, like a mortgage. So in order to keep the regulations easy for the buyer to have an equipment financing program to replace older equipment financing regulations and rules and regulations are much easier. So everything is credit driven. The better the credit, the better the program. Rates now currently, if you go for an interest rate, we're just like bank financing. You can get as low as 5% on up. If it's a $10 million transaction, you might look at 3.5%. But really in the equipment finance industry, it would be very unfair to say that everything's credit driven by an interest rate, because there really isn't a true interest rate to a rental. And because the agreements are written like a rental agreement, you can't put an interest rate next to that rental agreement. But yet you can make the rules of how someone qualifies for the financing much easier because it's written like a rental agreement.
And Barbara, for people that want more information about the services your company offers, where can they go on the web?
They would go to sclequipmentfinance.com.
That's all one word, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie, L as in Larry, because why not? That's sclequipmentfinance.com, and Barbara Griffith is the president of SCL Equipment Finance. And Barbara, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Larry. It's been a pleasure.
I want to introduce you to a new website, Thalo.com. Thalo is an artist community and networking site for creative people to connect, be inspired, and showcase their creativity. Thalo.com features content from around the world with a global perspective on all things creative. Thalo is the place for creative folks to learn, collaborate, market, and sell their works. Thalo is a part of Thalo Arts, a worldwide community of artists, filmmakers, and storytellers. From photography to filmmaking, performing arts to fine arts, and everything in between, Thalo is filled with the resources you need to succeed. Visit Thalo.com and discover how their community can help you connect, learn, and succeed. That's Thalo.com. Jim Malcolm is the North American General Manager for Humaneyes Technology. He's responsible for managing the Views VR camera product ecosystem and sits on the board of directors for the Consumer Technology Association and is the immediate past president of the Imaging Alliance. Hello, Jim. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's always good to have you back. How would you describe the Views VR camera?
The quickest way to think of the Views camera, it is a stereoscopic VR camera. Captures 360-degree video in full VR, so it's a 4K video per eye, so you get 3D stereoscopic imagery.
I've seen 3D done in a number of different places around the world, but recently you got involved with a project that took you somewhere other than the world. Tell me about this.
It did take us out of this world a little bit. We had the opportunity to work with National Geographic, who was working on a TV series called One Strange Rock. And what they wanted to do was to give a VR experience to viewers who could actually go up to the International Space Station in a VR headset and experience weightlessness and what it's like to be in the space station. So long story short, we worked with them and were able to get the camera up into the space station for this series.
Did National Geographic come to you, or did you reach out to them for this 3D project?
It started at a trade show, actually, earlier that year at NAB. They were going around trying to figure out what type of cameras to do, and we sat down and actually stood up during the trade show and had a conversation about VR and cameras. And what they really liked about our camera are two things. Three. One was the actual size and the weight. It was actually manageable and easy to get up. Second of all, because it's incredibly easy to use, they didn't need to train the astronaut to become a photographer, right? All he had to do was turn it on and off. And then last piece that made sense to everybody was the fact that we have such high image quality, which unfortunately, because of our price point, people think that, maybe it can't be good. But the camera can actually create 2 4K videos. So the Nat Geo piece that you see, they actually rendered that out at 4096 by 4096 resolution. That then causes all kinds of problems in post because the codecs aren't recognized and it's hard to export it and do everything else. But Nat Geo, together with their partners, were able to manage that workflow and render out at the maximum resolution of the camera.
Well, how did you get your cameras approved to be on the space station?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot that goes into the back end of it. We had to work not only with National Geographic, but also NASA and their third-party agencies to become certified. And they take the cameras through a pretty vigorous system to look at everything from cosmic radiation interference possibilities and battery and weight and reliability in order to get approved to go up to space. And the good news is the Views camera was selected to go up.
Did you need to alter or change any part of the camera or its associated technology to go into space?
We did not do it ourselves, but NASA did work to create a new battery system. Apparently, the lithium-ion batteries are frowned upon in the International Space Station because of fire hazards or other issues you might have in weightlessness. So they created an adapter to connect to their existing power ports that they have already approved and in space. So short of taking out the battery and powering it differently, there were no other modifications to the camera itself.
So what gear was sent up, and when did it go?
So it went up in November of 2017 with the Cygnus aircraft, which is actually a supply ship that sent up the supplies. It was received by one of their astronauts that's up there, who's actually an astronaut with ESA, the European Space Agency, named Paolo Naspali. It's the Views camera itself that went up, and then this extra battery pack that they created. And they did one other small modification to the camera, which was they wrapped it in copper. And they wrapped it in copper to protect the sensors from cosmic rays.
It must just have been so exciting to watch that rocket take off. What was it like?
It's amazing to watch it go up, but you still don't really get it. You're like, okay, yeah, that went up and I have something in there. But what really got it for me is when I first watched the footage for the first time and it came down, we rendered it because it came down as raw data. So we had to render it once it landed back into our servers. And I put it in a headset and I literally felt like I was flying around or floating around in the International Space Station. That's when it really hit me that oh my God, like I am in the International Space Station, and we did all of this work together, of course, with National Geographic and NASA and ESA and everybody else to create this amazing content.
What were your challenges in editing the footage, and who did the editing?
We did the rendering itself. The camera itself captures raw video in a proprietary format. We then put that through the Views software in order to render it into files. So we rendered the video clips, but then National Geographic went ahead and did the final edit on it itself. And I would say that the biggest challenge that we had were obviously stitch lines, which you're always going to have in VR anyway, how to manage them. But it was an extra challenge because it's a relatively tight space. So you had lots of up-close objects or things floating by that went through stitch lines we had to take into consideration.
I had a chance to look at the video, which is posted to your website. It's about 4.5 minutes, if I remember, and it's just spectacular. Between the music, the narration, the script, and the video, it's a spectacular piece of work. What comments have you had on it?
It's twofold. First of all, people are absolutely amazed with the storytelling. And when I look at a lot of the work that's been done in VR so far, it really hasn't been tied as well as it can be to a narrative or a story or a dialogue. And in the case of One Strange Rock, and what the producers did was they created a 10-part series. It's narrated and hosted by Will Smith, and that's actually broadcast on TV. Then they made this companion product, which is the VR, where they were able to use the graphics and the voiceover and the music and the talent and everything. And so we ended up with this very high production value piece that is kind of this companion to the much larger One Strange Rock.
Playback and distribution of VR media has been causing the industry some issues. Recently, you guys announced something new that could help. What's the announcement?
So the announcement we have is something called Humaneyes Zone. And what Zone is a platform that you can go to on your PC and just go to any web browser, basically, and you can construct your own VR website in 360-degree 3D VR video, and then you can distribute that to headsets using a standard browser. In other words, whoever is viewing that VR content in a mobile platform doesn't need to download an app.
What's involved in getting it, and how is it priced?
The Zone itself, there's 3 different tiers of it, right? There's a free package that gives you a little bit of storage space, and then it goes all the way up. If you get the top of the line, it's $200 a year, but that not only gives you access to the platform, but lets you put in custom URLs and embed it into your existing web presence so that it looks very seamless as opposed to a freestanding site.
There's been a lot of talk recently that VR is not growing as quickly as it was a couple of years ago. Now, I know you are personally fully invested in VR, but what's your take on the industry? Is it slowing down, or is it becoming niche, or is it still something that the rest of us need to pay attention to?
It's definitely something we need to pay attention to. And I'm not just saying that from the content creation point of view, but actually this week I was at WITI, the Women in Technology International Conference, and I had the opportunity to present to a lot of the attendees there VR and AR applications. And although all of us kind of propeller heads that are in this category all the time start going, well, wait a minute, I've seen this before, I've done that. And we cannot lose sight of the millions and millions of people who have never seen a VR experience. They've never seen a narrative that's then turned into a nonlinear narrative in a headset where you can actually be entertained or be trained or be informed or get excited about something that you're creating. So again, the industry is in its infancy, and a lot of us in the industry tend to talk to each other and kind of we see the same things. Please, I don't want anybody to lose sight of the fact that the mass market consumer, the real market opportunity to monetize VR, has never even experienced it.
For people that do want to know what Views has available, where can they go on the web?
The easiest way to find us is simply go to views.camera, and that's VUZE.camera. There's no .com or anything like that on the end, so views.camera, and you'll find your way to us.
That website is VUZE.camera, views.camera, and Jim Malcolm is the North American General Manager for Humaneyes Technologies that makes the Views camera. And Jim, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I will ask an unrelated question when you're done with me.
No, we're done. Go ahead.
So the unrelated question to this is, What are you hearing from the industry about this space?
For me, I think the VR industry is preaching to the choir, and it needs to figure out a way to broaden its church, to use a really bad analogy.
Yeah, but you're spot on.
The core of VR, the thing that makes it most compelling, is its experiential nature. I can't go to the space station, but I can experience it using your video.
It's a really good point. And one of the things we often talk about it is this gap between being an observer, which is really what we've done for, however many of years that we've gone to either a movie theater to watching, Netflix on our streaming on our TV, right? We are watching or observing what's going on. What VR does, and particularly good VR, is it turns you into a participant. And if we can immerse a viewer into becoming a participant in the experience, then they're going to start to interact with it. They're going to have things like higher brand recall. They're going to have desire to come back into the headset again for another layer of experience, because they're not just watching something, they're participating in it. Part two to that is opening the door into social VR. Fortunately, right now there's still this stigma of, oh, I don't want to put on a headset and sit there by myself and be lonely, and my friends will make fun of me or make videos and post them on the internet of me online, just sitting in my headset. I have a different argument, which is as social platforms take off, and you and I could be having this conversation in a virtual reality headset in the future where we can actually see each other in photorealism using camera technology that brings us to life in VR. Now you have a reason to go in a headset other than entertainment or consumption. You have a reason to go in to communicate with your coworkers, to train groups, to hang out with your friends, to see your parents who live on the other side of the country. All of that stuff is coming. It's just, how do we inspire the next group of creators today in order to deliver on those promises in the future?
Put on a headset and do something totally abnormal. I think that's a hard pitch.
I think it's a hard pitch today, but I think we're going to see this interesting wave where people are going to get their first in-depth, long-term headset experiences at work.
Interesting.
Then they'll start to become trained, for lack of a better term, how to interact in a headset, which then opens the curiosity door to, wow, what else is out there? What else can I do with this? Healthcare is coming up big time in VR, the airline industry. There are a bunch of different verticals. And even though we don't see the entertainment titles out yet, they're going to come. And I think they're going to come at the same time we see a maturity and accessibility to headsets. So Oculus Go at $200, right? That's been out for, a couple of months now? That's a bit of a game changer because it makes things more available.
Mm-hmm.
As an industry, we don't see what's referred to as AAA content, right? The high-end stuff coming from the motion picture studios, because the development cycle for those AAA experiences is about 3 years. The technology to truly create this stuff only became mainstream about 18 months to a year ago. So in reality, we're still 1.5 to 2 years away from productions that are in development now that they actually become productized. So you got to remember, when you do start to see that AAA content from the major labels come out, that's the stuff that's being built now.
Mm-hmm.
And most of it's being done behind closed doors, and people aren't talking about it because there's a competitive first, and how am I going to get this out, and where's my revenue stream going to be on it, and all that business model is getting figured out in parallel.
That's exciting. Jim, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
I was just thinking, it's Thanksgiving night here in the U.S., a time to reflect and be grateful for all that we have. All too often, we determine our value by the things that we own. But the recent California wildfires changed my perspective on that. Our house was in the middle of the fires, and though we were evacuated, our house was safe when we came back to it 5 days later. But within just a few blocks are the ruins of scorched hills and burned-out houses. So many other families lost everything. Donation centers are set up in parking lots throughout our neighborhood. At this time of Thanksgiving, much has been lost. But much also has been found. The kindness of strangers, the strength of family and friends, and the realization that we are all part of a much larger family. Like many families, we may not all get along, but when times are tough, we can all help. That's what I'm thinking about this Thanksgiving. I wish you and your family health, happiness, and the strength to continue. I'll chat with you again next week. I want to thank our guests this week, Norman Hollyn with USC, Mark Harrison with DPP, Barbara Griffin with SCL Equipment Finance, Jim Malcolm with Humaneyes, and James DeRuvo with doddleNEWS.com. There's a lot of history in our industry, and it's all posted to our website, digitalproductionbuzz.com. Here you'll find thousands of interviews, all online and all available to you today. And remember to sign up for our free weekly show newsletter that comes out every Saturday morning. Talk with us on Twitter at DPBuzz and Facebook at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Our theme music is composed by Nathan Doogie Turner with additional music provided by smartsound.com. Our producer is Debbie Price. My name is Larry Jordan. Have a very happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for listening to the Digital Production Buzz. The Digital Production Buzz is copyright 2018 by Thalo LLC.